Let's just start at the top, might as well. Small fleet starts. You know, relative to big fleet starts, they're easy. I've been in Florida the last 3 months, one weekend a month, racing J70s, and we've had 53 boats on the starting line and a pretty consolidated race course in Tampa Bay, on the east side of Tampa Bay, so not even enough room really to have free air. Some of the boats could get off the starting line and some of the boats are on the second row, and then life is hard at that point. But when there's only 3 or 4 boats on the line, you have all the room in the world to find a free lane, and that's really the whole key coming off the line, is you want to make sure you're sailing in free air. You want to be going the direction you want to be going, and that's paramount. You want to be heading to either the next, we mostly sail on these little lakes, and there's big velocity differences and big directional differences, and typically in light and moderate air, the thing that wins the race is the velocity differences. So you want to set yourself up on the starting line so that you're aiming towards the next good velocity. And if it's sort of to the left of the starting line, you might work your way to the left side of the starting line. If it's more to the right side of the race course, you might start up by the committee boat. But honestly, it's not that critical in a small boat fleet, because 3 or 4 boats, you're always going to find a free lane if you have a bad start. If someone rolls over you at the start and you can't go the direction you want to go, you can tack out briefly, but don't spend a lot of time going on the wrong tack. Obviously, if you wanted to go on starboard because you want to be going to the left, then that's still the most important thing, but you don't want to sail in dirty air, so you can tack out, and pretty quickly in a small fleet, you'll get into free air, and then you can tack back to starboard and head to where you wanted to head initially. But I would feel fortunate that you're trying to start in a small fleet. It's hard to go wrong. Was there any specific question about dealing with a start that small, deeper than what I'm telling you?
Would you start, like a J24 doesn't accelerate very fast, and so would you start further back from the line and try to hit it at full speed? I mean, what we tend to do is sail back and forth across the line and then turn up, when it's close to the start. Would you start further back so that you have more momentum? Because it's hard to accelerate in a big boat like that versus a lighter, smaller boat. You can kind of sit up on the line and luff and then, sheet in and accelerate pretty quick.
Yeah, I mean, the 24 doesn't accelerate as quick as most dinghies, but still accelerates pretty quickly if you, bear off slightly, get the sails trimmed properly. It'll get going pretty quickly. The danger of just reaching back and forth is, if your timing's off or you're reaching into a boat underneath you, you might have to head up to avoid them and be over the starting line. So I'm not sure you want to be reaching down the line maybe as much as what you just suggested. Start back a little further and trim in and go a little more upwind than reaching, because you run the problem of running into the boat to leeward if you're reaching. And the boat to leeward has right of way over you, so you just can't reach down into a boat that's underneath you. And just work on your timing. If it's a J24, you can do some time and distance stuff where you're reaching around in various velocities and time to see how long it takes to get from point A to point B, and you can get pretty comfortable with hitting the line just right. It's dangerous when you get there too early and you have to turn down and bear into guys underneath you. And it's dangerous if you get luffed up into the committee boat too by kind of reaching in and trying to reach around the committee boat. So maybe a little more upwind stuff and a little less reaching. Yep.
The MC scouts, a lot of times for nationals, will have a mid-boat race committee and the pin on each end.
Yeah.
You want to talk about the starting in the middle versus the ends, and is it based upon the venue that you're at, or how do you choose middle or ends? Yeah,
we can do that. I mean, that's the exact opposite of this, and it's not really one of the questions, but it's a good question. We'll sneak it right in here right now. But yeah, that's the exact opposite. When we race MCs, it's one of the most popular classes, and sometimes we have 100 boats on the starting line. And typically, if there's more than 60 boats at a regatta, they'll, instead of having just one long starting line, they'll have a pin down here and a committee boat over here and another committee boat in the middle. And it's not really one line, it's 2 side-by-side starting lines. And the way I like to approach it, it's really dangerous on a lot of these lakes where we sail MCs. Small lakes, very shifty. When you have to make a line big enough for 100 boats, you're almost from one shoreline to the other. We just had the Nationals in Pewaukee, Wisconsin last summer, and that's what happens. We had, 80-some boats, and the line was so long that relative to the size of the weather leg, the line was pretty long. So if you got stuck on an edge and say you started at the port end and a big shift came in from the right, well, now you're in trouble because there's 82 boats ahead of you and the weather mark isn't very far away. So when the fleet's that big and there's a boat in the middle, I try mostly to start near this midline boat. Gives me a good sense of where the starting line is and gives me flexibility on the shifts one way or the other. I'm not too far out of bounds on where the next shift is. Only half the fleet can be ahead of me if a shift comes off the corner. So I remember the very first time the Nationals were in Pewaukee, the best place to potentially start in a line like this would be just to windward of the committee boat, because then there's the midline boat, because then there's no one directly underneath you. But I tried that, and I came off the starting line, and my board hit the anchor line, and I came to a dead stop, and it was a rough race. So, yeah. So now most of the time, if I'm going to start in the middle, I'll try to be just on this side of that midline boat, and that works out really, really well. So, again, the guy can't be right above you because he's going to hit the anchor. So, there was one race I won at the Nationals where I started here. And pretty quickly it turned into a good starboard header. So it was time to tack. Anytime you get a good header, it's usually time to tack. It was time to tack. Since I had no one just above me, I could tack to port, and I was the first one to tack and won the race. So that's the exact opposite of the 3-boat start, is the gigantic 3 committee boat start. And that's a pretty good strategy if you're not sure what to do. Kind of stick by that middle boat. Good answer. Like that? Any other questions about that? Whoa. This one I like, how to get into a new fleet. Because I've been in lots and lots of fleets over my career. I've made sales for lots of different boats. Whenever a class is pretty strong, if there's some local presence for me or Texas presence, I'll get involved in the class, and then I'll get involved in the class nationally. And I've been really lucky. I've probably won national championships in probably 10 different classes of boats. And a lot of it is because I generally have the same velocity moving from boat to boat. And I learned this from my mentor. I grew up sailing sunfish in southeast Michigan, a little lake called Devil's Lake. We had sunfish fleet and we had a lightning fleet. Sort of sailed the lightning, but it was a little intimidating. Did a little bit of it, but I was kind of the hotshot sunfish guy. And I was probably teaching junior sailing at the club. I was going to go back to Texas to go to college or start college. I can't remember which one, maybe go back. And my mentor, a guy named Bruce Goldsmith, who made sails years ago in Chicago for Murphy Nye. I don't know if there's anybody in the room that remembers the good old days. So Bruce, in my opinion, was the most naturally gifted sailor ever. He could just sniff out shifts, and I sort of think I approached my sailing career the way he approached his career. And he won 2 Pan American gold medals in the Lightning. He won Lightning World Championships. He won nationals in a bunch of classes also. So he said, hey, Bill, instead of going back to Texas, you stay here this year. You crew for me in the Lightning, and I'll get you a Thistle because you want to steer your own boat. And I go, yeah, this is incredible. It's incredible. And what was in my mind was like, well, this is how I'm really going to learn the intricacies of the Lightning. And it's got the backstay, and it's got the Cunningham, and you move the rake fore and aft, and you move the, you got the spinnaker, and all the Cunningham, all this stuff that the Sunfish didn't have. And I thought, well, boy, let's just take it to this whole new level. So on the Sunfish, I was really, really good at trimming the main, because we only had a main. We didn't have anything else to deal with. And I was really, really good steering the boat. And I was really, really good tactically, because we sailed on lakes like this and got super strong tactically. All right, I got the basics. So I jump in the boat with Bruce, and I'm ready for all the wizardry to happen, all the line pulling and all that, and all the little 1 more inch on the backstay. And after a couple regattas, I went, well, he's focusing on the exact same thing I was focusing on. He's really concentrating on steering. He's insistent on making sure he's going the right way and spending most of his time figuring out what that is. And he's really working his main sheet, and he hardly ever messes with that other stuff. I mean, there's also on a lightning a jib sheet that you got to worry about, but right then it became clear that if you try to perfect the basics being tactics, steering the boat on a single sailboat, trimming the main, or if it has a jib, trimming the jib, and that means focusing on the main sheet and the jib sheet. And if you spend most of your time trying to be proficient at that, you're going to win most of your races. And you're never going to get those basics perfect, so you always can improve those basics. I mean, you just think tactically where you miss a shift and you can lose 20 boat lengths, or you miss the velocity that's on the other side of the course and you lose 40 boat lengths. You can never lose or gain that much by pulling on the Cunningham or by pulling on the backstay. So I would just transfer what he clearly showed me whenever I jump into a new class, be it a J22 or the Thistle or the Flying Scot and the whatever it is, the MC, and I've won the nationals in all these boats. I do the same thing. I get in. I want to have a good, strong understanding of how to trim the main. If it's got a jib, how to trim the jib. Be fanatical about getting off the line and going the right way, and then I'll get us right up to the front of the fleet. And then we can start tweaking stuff after that. But the tweaks don't move us much in the fleet one way or the other. It's these raw adjustments that get us right to the front right away. Make sense? Any questions about that? Because it's easy to get overwhelmed. All these classes have tuning guides. All these classes start talking, they start having the chatter at the dock, and the drinking the beer after. Oh, in the Y you have to do this, or in the Thistle you have to do this, or we do it different in our class. Oh, you can only. No. I take my basic rule of thumb into every class I sail. So that should be encouraging that these classes aren't that mystifying. It's once you understand the sport, you can take that from class to class. All right. Make sense? And that's a big one, but I guess we've elaborated on that enough, huh? Yeah. Super light air sail choices. Yeah, you mentioned 5 miles an hour. That's still actually a lot of breeze. I wouldn't be switching out of a Genoa if it's blowing 5, but if it's blowing 2 or under, yeah, when it's so light, you have trouble keeping you want the leeches of the sails to be a little more open in light air than you do in moderate air. In moderate air, on most boats, you want, the upper third of the main to be parallel with the direction of the boom, and the boom to be parallel with the center line of the boat. Jib, about midway up the jib, if you have a jib batten about midway up the jib leech, in moderate air, you want the jib batten to be exiting parallel with the center line of the boat. In real light air, unless you're really heeling the boat over, you have a hard time opening up the leeches of the sail. Gravity just pulls the sail back on top of you, and the leeches hook. You need the sails to twist open in light air more than in any other condition, unless you're really overpowered. And at some point, the Genoa just won't open enough for you. But we're talking almost no air. So in those cases, yeah, probably you are better off with the little jib. And sometimes when you're going downwind and it's blowing 2, you're better off taking the chute down because it's just laying all over stuff. Kind of the same theory. You just finally get to a point where gravity isn't enough to make a bigger sail look good, and you start getting rid of sails for that reason. But I wouldn't do it when it's blowing 5. Things should be looking pretty good then. Make sense? Yeah. So yeah, how to get back after a bad start. That is me now. That is me. That is so me. This is the first class I've really been struggling in. One of the classes I'm sailing for Quantum now is the J70. It's the most popular class in the country right now. They had 180 boats at the Worlds 2 years ago, and they had 100 boats at the Worlds this year. we had 53 boats for 3 regattas in a row in Florida, and it's a super strange boat. I'll never say I like sailing the boat, but I'm going to sail it because it's popular. But it has no stability. It's a real narrow boat. It heels over real easily. It's super finicky. They trim the jib. There's a jib car, but they pull the weather jib sheet, kind of like you do in Flying Scots sometimes, to pull the jib even further inboard than where the jib track is. The keel, unlike most sport boats are light and they don't have much keel weight, so they have a bulb at the bottom, like a J24. You've probably seen, it looks like a torpedo bulb at the bottom. Well, the J70 just has this sort of flared out thing at the bottom of the keel. It looks like a Danforth anchor, a Gumby foot. People call it a Gumby foot. I don't really know what Gumby's foot looks like. Is it all flared out? I guess it is, huh? And so we did some testing down there, and when I found out, like, this is a problem. So most boats, in most classes, we did a lot of this. I sailed on the Olympic team, not in the Olympics, but on the Olympic team in 470s in the late 80s. And so we would do 2 or 3 boat testing where we're trying different sail shapes or trying different stuff. And we do that in some of these classes too, before nationals. I'm sure some of you guys do this, where you just line the boats up bow to bow and you trim in and go along for a while. And if somebody gets ahead on the group, you don't want to stay ahead because then you give the other boats dirty air, and then the testing falls apart. So typically when the boat gets ahead, you slow down, you ease the main of the jib, and so you get back in line with the other boats and you keep sailing along. Well, on the J70, whoever would get back in line after going too fast and trim back in, they would continue to fall backward because of that nasty looking thing at the bottom of the keel. There's a lot of drag. So you have to stare at the knot meter the whole time. You can't let the boat slow down. If the good upwind speed for the day's condition is 5.8 knots, you can't let the boat slow down to 5.3 knots. So you're staring at the compass and you can't let the boat slow down. And the boat's a nightmare, but we'll figure it out eventually. But in any event, since it's a nightmare, I've been getting a lot of bad starts. And I'm trying to dig my way back into the race course. But part of what happens is just pure leverage and potential gains and potential losses when you're in the middle of the fleet. The fleet starts stringing out. I'll first say what to do if you're in the front of the fleet and not fall back to the middles. Probably the best example was another one of the guys who taught me a lot about sailing, a guy named Dave Ullman, who won 3, 4, 70 worlds in a row and a bunch of Meldus 24 stuff. Just a wizard. And so his theory was when you come off the starting line, a lot of it had to do with this starting in the middle stuff, be a little conservative. Hopefully you're in the front of the fleet. And then as the race goes on, because the people in the middle are getting dirty air and because people get a little more desperate and do dumb things and luff each other, you get frustrated in the middle of the fleet, the fleet's really spread out. You've all raced enough to see that the winners get really far ahead and the guys in the back get really far behind. And that has a lot to do with the dirty air and not being able to sail the direction you want to go because of the dirty air. And so his hypothesis was, as the fleet spread out, as the race went on, later and later in the race, the boats are further and further apart. So if you're going to take a flyer or go, get some leverage, or say 80% of the boats around you are going one way, if you go the other way if you go the other way early in the race when there's lots of boats going this way, you may lose a whole bunch of boats because the fleet's still pretty consolidated and you're not too far apart. But as the fleet spreads out, you can take more and more chances. So now there's lots of boats in front, there's lots of boats behind, that little group around you, maybe they're going this way, and you go, this is a pretty good chance for me late in the race to go the opposite direction, get leverage on those boats, and then hopefully I get something out here. If it doesn't work, I won't lose too many boats, but if it works, I got a good chance to pass boats. So I think when you end up further back in the race, you can take bigger risks when it seems appropriate to take risks. Does that make sense? And we get back in the fleet pretty quickly in the J70 after bad starts, and we'll do things that get us into free air, even if we're sailing on headed tack for a while, just to get our air free. And then as the race goes on, we'll take more and more chances. Won't be afraid to get closer to the edges, and more times than not, if you're patient enough, before you get to the ley line, some kind of shift will come your way. And the fact that you gained all that leverage on the boats that were predominantly going the other way, if you hit the shift right, you can get them all back. So I think it's not textbook what I'm telling you, but if you do find yourself in the middle of the fleet, don't be afraid to take a few risks to get back in the fleet. There were at the Championship of Champions, we won the regatta by a lot, but 3 of the races we were over early, and we didn't go back right away. So we were dead last in 3 of those races. And all 3 of those races, we came back to finish in the top 5. And typically, I was able to do that because I would commit myself to one side of the course or the other. And if I was patient and patient and patient and waited enough, it was a little tiny shifty venue in Atlanta that eventually a good shift would come my way. And boom, we hit it at the right time, and pretty quickly we got back in the races just by being patient and sailing until we knew we got a really good shift, which is not the way you might sail in the front of the fleet, but when you're kind of stuck in the middle of the fleet, you're looking for opportunities to free up your air, and you're looking for opportunities to get some leverage on the boats around you. Does that make sense? Yeah. People are, the psychology is a little weird in our sport where not as enough people as should be are confident enough in their own personal tactics. I'm totally confident in looking upwind and seeing what's coming at me, looking at the puffs, looking at the lulls, looking at the direction, looking at stuff on shore, boats that aren't even in the race course. I usually have a really good picture of what's happening, and that's when I'm going to tack based on what I see. But a lot of what happens in racing is a group goes to tack, and just reflexively you think, these guys are tacking, it must be time to tack. So you see an awful lot of group tacking and group jibing where it's not necessarily the correct time to do it. It's just you get caught up in the moment that, maybe I haven't been paying attention, but these 3 guys just tacked, I got to tack. And if you overcome that by looking upwind, that can really make gains on that kind of group think. Yeah.
Were you sailing knock to get a clear lane?
Yeah. I mean, dirty air is really bad. If you're never going to if you don't think you'll get a good shift by sailing off that lift, and you'll never get a good lift coming back, maybe not. But again, this venue and most venues we sail are shifty enough that, maybe you can burn one header, get off that dirty air, and maybe pretty quickly, hopefully, again, on these lakes, mostly you'll hook into something if you're patient enough, and could get you back into it. So I do my best not to sail in dirty air. Yeah.
I'm just curious, you mentioned that you don't like the J70s that much.
Yeah. Do you have one?
Why are they so popular?
I'm sorry?
Why aren't they so popular?
It's strange, if you ask me. I think part of it is J-boats. They're an incredible marketing machine. They don't really have any interest in building boats. They don't build their own boats. They contract. They used to contract with TPI. I think they've gone out of business. But they'll just license people to build their boats, and they're really, really effective at marketing. And they build the boats pretty strong. There's old J22s and J24s out here, right? J24s will last for 90 years, 1,000 years. And so, they build a pretty solid product, and they have a good reputation, and they market really hard. I think people jumped into the J70 because it was the right size, and it was Jay's sport boat, and the early people didn't really have an understanding that it was a really weird boat to sail. And then there's enough people in it that, activity breeds activity, and I think they just sort of took off because the activity was taken off. And you hear a lot of people grumbling, but they still say, hey, it's the best thing going, so just learn to sail the boat.
Is it still growing? Or?
I think it's still in the growth phase. Like I said, they had nearly 100 boats at the Worlds in Boston last fall, and they had, I think it's growing worldwide too. Probably we can kind of track the size of one design classes by how many. Most sales have to have a little royalty tag from the class. We pay it to the class. You kind of track how big the class is, but big classes are classes like Flying Scot and Thistle. I don't know, a few others. So there's 500 sales sold a year in those classes, and those are considered big classes. Well, in the J70 last year, they sold 2,800 sales, so it's just far and away the biggest class in the world right now. Well, not like laser opti, but boats that people are racing actively. Yeah. Any other thought about the 70 or?
Not yet.
Yeah. That's it. They're good at marketing. They run lots of ads.
We see on the J24 series, we have a good sized fleet.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's appropriate size for the lake.
Yeah, we used to race them a lot on little lakes in Texas. We had huge fleets in the 90s, early 90s in Texas. We'd have 50 boats racing in a lake not much bigger than this, a Texas circuit. It's sort of, in our part of the country, it's wound down a little bit, but I mean, it's still a neat boat. I mean, you can get one for $5,000 now that's raceable, so it's just, if you get new sales, that's $5,000. Like, anyhow. Hey, oh, that's mine?
Yes, Andy brought it for you.
Nice. All right. Did that, yeah, and just, be patient. The other part of getting back in the fleet is you got a slight advantage going downwind because the puffs are coming from behind, and if it's puffy conditions, you can rally up to the group ahead of you a lot of the time when you're behind offwind and you're back in the pack. And so sometimes just the puffs and the lulls work out where you're bringing a puff to them. They have to round the leeward mark before they get the puff, and you've caught right back up to them. So it just, if you stay positive the whole race, you'd be surprised how many times you can catch back up. Any thoughts about that? No? Yeah, class growth. Really good practices. Where's Marianne? Yeah, the sports, I don't know if it's struggling, but I'd say it's been stagnant for a couple of decades. And I don't know that we have fewer people sailing, but we have a lot more classes. I mean, I'm talking about how giant this J70 class is, and it wasn't even here 10 years ago. So it sort of fragments the sailors a little bit. And a lot of classes are trying to do a lot of different things, and some are somewhat successful. The Lightning class is one of the first classes to introduce a scholarship program where the class members put money into a general fund, and they use that money to donate a boat and sails and regatta expenses for kids just coming out of college. Thistle class is doing something like that. MC class is doing a little bit of that. And so that scholarship stuff, that's one thing people are doing to grow classes. I think the other things that maybe have been working lately is some of these older classes are used to running really long events, midwinters and nationals, and a lot of these older classes like Scots and Thistles and Lightnings are week-long events, and people don't have as much time as they used to. Probably the most popular sailing in our country is summer, either Wednesday night or Thursday night, or whenever that after work night is that people go sailing. That's the most popular sailing in our sport all across the country. People are doing summertime midweek sailing because they don't have to commit their day to it. You got to commit a weekend, or you got to commit a whole day, it's a little harder. You got to commit a whole weekend, it's even harder. If you have to commit an entire week, it's really hard. So a lot of classes are shortening up their schedules. Most new classes and some older classes are switching from what would have been 5-day events to 3-day events. I think that helps. The MC class runs a 3-day nationals. And I know that helps. People just don't have the time they used to have. I think a lot of the measurement stuff hurts classes. And again, some of these classes, You show up to a major championship and you got to waste a day or two measuring in your boat, measuring in your sails, and it's been measured now for the 40th time in a row. And the fact of the matter is, if you want to cheat, you're going to cheat even if it gets measured. So I burn the 2 more days and go through the exercise. So again, the MC class is really strong, and I think it hits on 2 of the things I've just talked about. 1, they have short events, 3-day events for their major regattas. 2, they don't do any measurement. They don't do any sail measurement at the nationals. They don't measure the boats. They just take your word for it. You can tell if a sail's out of compliance. If it just looks too big, it's too big. So it's not that you can't really hide it. So I think classes that make it easier for the class members to participate are the ones that are having better success. Any other thoughts on that?
What about from a club perspective? Of traveling around, is there anything that different clubs do differently? I mean, you talk about Wednesday and Thursday nights, or trying to get back in racing on maybe Sundays. Or anything you see there?
Yeah, I mean, we have Sunday activity like a lot of clubs, but our Wednesday night in the summer is a little more prolific. I think you got to mix it up a little bit. Some of the old stuff that we got away from, we're having parties and be inclusive and make it more fun than just racing. And people, I think they get burned out after a pecking order is established. It's hard to break through the guys ahead of you unless you spend more time doing it. But if you're all kind of spending the same amount of time to it, it gets a little stagnant. And so, a lot of good parties, stuff like this, informational stuff. Mixing up the races is good. Andy and I talked about this a little bit on the way up here, I think. But at our club, just to make it less intimidating, we got to keep thinking about, how do you get someone who's on the edge of wanting to race actually get involved? Because it's intimidating. People don't want to get in the way. Our sport has people that yell, and unfortunately in our sport, the other thing is it's small enough that you're always going to race against the very, very best people. If it was like golf or tennis or any pro sport, or you would never be on the same course with the very best. But in our sport, everybody's together, so the new people get intimidated, and I think things that you can do to make it less intimidating. The thing that people are mostly intimidated when they're new is the starting line, right? And what seems to be popular, and it's working a little bit at our club, is for the big boats, more so than the little boats. I don't know if you guys race PHRF or Portsmouth or both, but just try to get away from that mass starting line. We do a lot of pursuit races where let the slowest boat in the fleet go first, and then it's all timed out. I mean, say you're going to run, and it doesn't have to always be windward leeward. I mean, it's the hardest to sail boats straight into the wind, right? And again, the top people in the sport always project this idea that, well, it's only going to be a good race if we go straight into the wind, or it's only going to be a good race if we go straight downwind. But honestly, I mean, that's not the case. I mean, what's the most popular race in the Midwest in the summer for big boats is the Chicago Mac, right? Well, it's just point to point. They don't care whether it's upwind or not. And the 300 plus boats. So you don't have to always set up a windward leeward race course. You can reach over to those lights over there. You can reach back, and it'll be a fine race. I mean, I think you guys know how to do pursuit stuff because you do it. But say, for example, if you're racing PHRF, the fastest boat in the group is, say, rates 90, and the slowest boat rates 210, 120 seconds, 2 minutes. That's you do a 5-mile race out there. So the slowest boat, the 210 guy, goes 10 minutes before the 90 rater goes, and everybody fits in between based on their rating. And what's neat about that, 2 things. One I mentioned already, is you're not all jammed on the starting line together. You have your own spot on the starting line, so it's not intimidating. You don't have to worry about the rules or hitting somebody. Not only that, but for a decent percentage of the race, you're in the front, or you're near the front, If you're a bad sailor, you're never in the front, you all start together. And so that's fun. You get different perspective. You're not sucking air your whole career. So I think there's a lot of advantages to that, and there's a lot of clubs that are doing that. So might try that. Sounds like you have already. Yeah, how do I sail? These guys want to take a been an hour. You want to take a 5-minute break? Anybody have to? No. Everybody's got big bladders.
It's up to you.
Keep rolling. It's up to you guys.
I'm good.
You're good. Annie's bladder's strong. Okay, I'll keep rolling. J24 Genoa versus Flying Sky. Somewhere Genoa versus Go over that question again.
So, that was, I have a Flying Scot, and everybody tells me it has to be sailed differently than, say, a J, because all the drive comes from the main and not the head sail, and I just can't hit that.
Yeah. Oh, thanks. Yeah, thanks. I better finish this one. Yeah, I think that falls into what I was talking about earlier, jumping from class to class to class. I'm not so sure I buy into it. I'd say whether you're sailing a Scot with a little jib and a big main, or like a J-boat, which has a fairly good main, but boom in that long, and a big Genoa, I still think you're doing the same thing. You're still on the Scot. You're still in moderate air, doing what I suggested earlier, where middle part of the main or the second batten from the top is pointed with the boom, and the boom's parallel with the center line of the boat. The jib on the Flying Scot, same sort of thing. Jib doesn't have a batten in the middle of the jib leech, but it has one down low and one up high. So you just have to envision a batten in the middle. So typically the lower batten is hooked a little bit to windward relative to the center line of the boat, and the upper batten is twisted open a little bit to leeward relative to the center line of the boat. Somewhere in the middle, the exit of the leech is parallel with the center line of the boat on the Scot, but I'm actually trying to do the same thing on a Flying Scot and a J24. So just whatever rule of thumb for trimming sails is a rule of thumb for trimming sails. And there, it makes sense? I mean, if you're off on doing the right thing on a Flying Scot main, you get in trouble in a hurry, especially because it has all that roach out the back also. If you trim too hard, the leech really hooks to windward, and especially in light air, you'll come to a dead stop. But that's still, so you might focus a little harder on trimming the Scot main properly than a J24 main, but still same rule of thumb. Yeah. Yeah, Leeward gate, that's one of the, I don't do much writing, but everybody's familiar with the fact that most race courses now have switched to where, which is pretty good, cuts down on collisions. Sport's getting smart, they don't want us to run into each other. So now typically, there's a starting line, and the wind's coming from here. Then typically there's a windward mark and an offset mark. And then down at the bottom there's a gate or two leeward marks. So it just helps with the flow of the race course, keep people from running into each other. So yeah, what I do is that not only helps me to get around the leeward gate, but it helps me so much tactically to get ready for the next beat. As I spend the last, for sure, the last 10% of the downwind leg really focusing on what the wind is doing behind me, and it's pretty easy to see what's going on unless you're in the very back of the fleet. If you're in the very back of the fleet, you don't have any boats as a reference to look at. But if you're up further in the fleet, you got all these boats behind you that are coming downwind, and they're good references. They can tell you where the velocity is, because you can tell which boats are going fast and which boats are going slow of the boats behind you. You typically see a little dark water. The boats start getting pushed faster, and you can also tell what jibe they're on. I mean, sometimes you might have a whole group of boats coming at you, and they're all on starboard jibe, and the sail isn't quite all the way out. Well, to me, that's a good indicator looking backwards that the wind's, instead of coming straight down from the weather mark, it's coming more a little from the upwind left side. And so I'll try to go around. If the upwind left side is going to be good, either right at or shortly after I round the gate, I'm going to go around this gate and head out this way and try to get this port lift going upwind. Same thing on the other side. If you really don't see anybody on this jibe anymore and you see them all over on this jibe, well, you know the wind's kind of coming from upwind right side and going to go around this gate and try to get into this shift and get headed on port and tack over to starboard and be on the lifted starboard tack. So I spend an awful lot of time looking backward at the boats behind me to see what jibe they're on and what kind of velocity they're in. And that'll help dictate which one of these gates to go around. If I'm in a big cluster and there's 6 boats going around this gate and I'm the 5th or 6th boat and no one's over here, well, you know, every now and then when you're in a cluster of boats, you might go around the wrong tactical gate. Just go around it so you can be in free air and don't go very far, and then, you know, a few boat lengths and then tack over, and you can still get to the proper side of the upwind leg that you want to get on. But it's probably better, instead of being behind 4 or 5 boats getting dirty air heading off this way, to go around the other gate, go a couple boat lengths and tack over. Does that make sense? But if you're being observant, it should be quite obvious which gate is going to be the favored gate to go around. Does that make sense? You just telling me to screw it when I say it should be obvious? But again, it's sort of the psychology before when I was talking about groupthink, where boats tack, they tack. Boats jibe, they jibe, in unison almost. And you end up starting to do the wrong thing as you get closer to the leeward mark. Again, the psychology of what's going on. The closer you get to the leeward mark, you have to overcome the idea of just staring at all the boats around you, looking for who's got room, who doesn't have room, are you going to hit someone, looking in the bottom of the boat to clean up the lines, get prepared for the rounding. Getting prepared for the rounding is not just not hitting the boats around you and making sure the strings are proper to go around the mark, but it's a super critical time to be looking backwards and being involved tactically. People shut themselves out tactically by getting focused into their little circle of 6 or 7 boat lengths, but you have to disregard that. You have to be good enough with your boat handling rounding the mark, or your boat handling not hitting other boats, that you can spend a fair bit of time looking behind you to develop a tactical game plan. And I'm sure you all see people with their heads staring in the bottom of the boat as you're approaching the leeward mark. Just means you have no idea what's approaching.
Do you rely on the crew to watch the wind behind you and the boats behind you, or does the skipper turn around and...
It can be the crew. You know, if you're sailing by yourself, you don't have that luxury. But when I'm sailing the MC, I'm not that big, so I sailed with 2 people. It's blowing over about 11 or so. But my crew, we've been together 5 or 6 years, and she spends most of the downwind leg, including approaching the gates, talking to me about what jibe the boats are on, where the pressure is coming from, where she thinks we should place the boat for the next upwind pressure. So it doesn't have, you know, if you can rely on a solid tactical crew, that's way better than the skipper doing it. Because the skipper wants to steer a good straight line. Skipper needs to see these boats around that he doesn't hit. So yeah, I mean, either if you have a good crew that you're confident, use them, or if you don't, then train that crew so they can pick up on these things and use the crew. Make sense? Pre-race strategy. Yeah. I haven't been doing much in the J70 because I feel weird in the boat. I do it a little bit, but you can kind of see there's a general theme here, and the theme's going to roll into this too, where a lot of us spend way too much time just avoiding boats around us or looking at boats right around us instead of, you can't develop a tactical picture just by looking at boats around you. You have to look way, way up the race course. So in the MC, it's easy to spot me when I used to use a colored sail, had pink and orange and stuff, and a little nerve-wracking because I could tell if I was over the starting line, but in any event, it's really easy to see where I am a lot of the time. So I'm sure most of you do what most of you do, which is, I'm not sure what side to stay on. You get ready for any race, and you're inside 6 or 7 minutes, and almost everybody's doing the same thing. And what are they doing? They're beam reaching. They're going this way, and they're going this way. And if you're this group of boats going this way, you as a skipper or maybe your crew, and these guys too, they're spending most of their time going pretty fast because they're reaching, and the faster they go, the better chance they have to hit the boats going the other way. So just reaching back and forth, avoiding one another. Hey, go up, go down, you're going to hit that guy. Hey, go up, go down. What are you learning tactically? Nothing. So I don't want to be reaching around here at high speed. Even if no one was around and I was down here, I'd be going super, super slow, if not stopped, so I could stand up in the boat. If you want to have a better perspective of where the wind's coming from, you need to be as high off the body of water as possible. If you're sitting down in your boat on the deck, you're almost at water level, and you have a hard time seeing the puffs coming at you. You should at least be standing up in the hull of the boat, and if you're more comfortable than that, you can stand up on the seat, and if you're more comfortable than that, you can stand up on the deck. I'm sure you've done race committee, you're standing up on the race committee boat, pontoon boat or whatever you have. You go, oh, look, that's so easy. Look at the puff coming over there. How come those guys aren't in that puff? Well, you see the whole thing for 2 reasons. You're up higher. You're not reaching around avoiding other boats. You're not concerned about hitting boats. You're standing on the pontoon boat, looking upwind, and you go, oh, I got this race figured out. This is so simple. How come I can't do this when I'm racing? Because you're going, I don't know what's coming. So, I go up here like 10 boat lengths in front of the parade, and I just get up there by myself. A couple people have joined me up there now, and we stand up in the boat, and we just stare upwind, and we stare not only to the weather mark, well, I don't know what they're doing, but I stare all the way to the windward shore. These lakes are small enough that you can see all the way to the shoreline. So I look through the weather mark and I look to the windward shore. And I'm not worried about people around me, and I'm just standing there studying the race course, and I watch the puffs come down, and I watch where they're coming from, and I watch how windy they are. And I'll do that for a couple minutes. I might go back up, and I'll kind of go up, and if I just stay on that side of the weather mark, probably till about 3 minutes to go or less, and then I'll just come down and rejoin the madness. And at that point, I have a really good picture of what I want to do tactically in the first beat. So if you're not developing a tactical game plan, you're just burning your chance to hit the shifts and get in the puffs. That make sense? Now, pretty soon, everybody's going to be up here. You're not going to be running into each other. But I doubt it. I'm shocked how few people join me up here. They're, hey, look out, look out, look out, look out, look out. So, sound good? Mm-hmm. Na-na-na-na. Mm-hmm. Downwind, and we sort of wrap that into that Leeward gate stuff, but There's a really good rule of thumb to get going early on the downwind leg. And this is critical because huge gains if you do it right, huge losses if you don't. And this is how you can get some separation right away at the weather mark, especially if it's a starboard upwind lift. So here's the rule of thumb. And just be talking this in your head as you're approaching the weather mark, okay? So if starboard tack is lifted as you get to the weathered mark, okay, then what do you want to do as soon as you get to the offset mark? Jibe, right. Starboard tack lift, jibe as soon as possible, because port tack downwind will be the favorite tack going downwind. And that one's the toughest because people don't do a great job of jibing right at the gate. Again, people get caught up with boats around them. The guy right behind them might be going up and getting their air, and I can't have this guy getting my air, and then you're reaching up and sailing the wrong jibe going downwind. So starboard's lifted, I got a jibe. Or you're going down the offset leg, and my sail's out really far going down this little offset leg, which means the wind's still from the right. I could almost put the chute up on the offset leg. I got a jibe right at the leeward mark. Well, if starboard tack's headed, just the opposite, or port tack is lifted, then you come around the weather mark, and it should be a pretty tight reach to the offset mark because port tack is lifted, port tack upwind. It's just a bear away, but you want to bear away to rum line, again, if you can. So much better when you don't have boats right around you. Again, it has to do with fleet congestion. The guys in the front of the fleet, they get further ahead on the downwind legs, again, mostly because they're sailing smarter. If you're in the front of the group and you're in shifty venues where one of the two jibes will point you right at the leeward mark, which probably will. On this lake, it's shifty enough. One of the two jibes is going to be well short of dead downwind. You're probably going to be reaching. But you want to be able to aim the boat right at the leeward mark when you're reaching. And the worst thing that can happen is having to reach up and defend yourself against the boat behind you. Part of what happens is it's not necessarily the boat behind you's fault, but they need to be disciplined. So anyhow, before I talk about that, the boats that are kind of clear ahead in the front of the pack, they're a little bit better anyhow, and they got a little gap, come around the weather mark, and boom, straight off to the leeward mark. There's this reaching fight behind you, and by the time you get to the first leeward mark, okay, it's going to be a pretty good race. No one's going to, the group got crazy. But, it's not necessarily, well, it is the boat behind's fault. And you may be the boat behind, Let's say we got spinnaker. But what happens, downwind leg obviously, is the puffs come first for the boat that's behind, right? He gets the puff, he accelerates, he starts charging into the boat ahead. Well, they get a little panicked, or they think that extra speed, they can just go up and around the boat ahead of them. Well, no. I mean, if the boat ahead has any brains at all, they're not going to just let that boat behind cover their air up and go around them. So they're going to reach up to defend, and they're going to start going faster, and this boat's going to reach up, just kind of like when we're driving cars, you tend to following the boat ahead of you. So you're just following this guy up, and now both these boats are reaching, and this boat that was well ahead of you never went into reach mode and got further and further ahead, and you guys you're going this way now, and you go faster when you're reaching up, but on just about any boat, you never can make up what they call the VMG. It's always better. You're not going fast enough to make up for the extra distance you have to sail. So if you're this boat and you're catching up to the boat ahead of you, what you really want to do is coax your boat down on the leeward side of him. Free his air up totally. Let him get the wind, all right? He'll get the wind. By the time you get to him, especially if you go to leeward a little bit, that allows him to get the wind, and then he'll accelerate, and then both of you can continue to smartly sail at the next mark instead of reaching off the course, We've all seen that a million times, right? Reaching off the course. The people in the front of the pack don't do that. They don't do that. They aim right at the next mark whenever they have a chance. So
So you're saying be patient.
yes.
And really, you're gonna go for the guy on the windward lane.
Yeah, because your mindset should be, you both want to sail smart. You're 5 boat lengths behind the leader, 6 boat lengths behind the leader, right? Not only do you want to pass him, but you want to beat him, right? If you get engaged in this deal and he reaches up, well, he's going to keep his air free because he's going to reach up. So you're not going to even pass him, right? You're still going to round right behind this guy. But this guy's not 6 boat lengths ahead anymore. He's 15 boat lengths ahead. So you probably didn't pass this guy, and you just say goodbye to that guy. Next race, maybe, if I'm lucky.
So the boats are reversed, now you're the front boat, what do you do?
Huh?
Boats are reversed, now you're the front boat, what are you doing?
You got to be cautious, because I'll talk to the boat behind me. I'll go, hey, what do you, let's not go reaching there. Then you got to be careful about talking too much. But hopefully, if you're the boat in front and everybody's disciplined, the guy is going to sail the leeward of you. Believe me, in the front of the fleet, that's what happens.
I'm learning that over time, but
Yeah.
I've been in the other situations so many times where you feel like you get rolled.
Yeah.
Because, yeah, maybe like you say, a newer sailor or whatever, I haven't learned it yet, but I'm starting to see what you're saying.
Yeah, you're catching up to this guy. Oh my God, I'm going to hit him. I got to go up and around him. No, just free his air up a little bit. You should always be looking. If you get the puff first anyhow, the subtleties of sailing to a downwind mark are typically, let's say it's pretty close to dead downwind. Upwind you're always trying to gain distance to weather. But downwind you're always trying to gain distance to leeward, because you don't want to end up high at the next mark and having to jibe back in. So you can sail deeper when you get a puff, and you're trying to gain distance down on a downwind leg. So if you're getting the puff first, your first move should be go down anyhow because you got the puff. So down in the puffs, up in the lulls, down in the puffs, up in the lulls. So if you're getting that puff, you should be taking it down anyhow. So that boat behind you should be driving off to leeward of you anyhow. Well, that's what I'm saying. That's why we got this one room we're talking about. Spread it to the world. Spread it to the world. You get it. If you have to do this, you're like, well, you have to do it, but I mean, when I see this developing, if it's really, really broad and I see there's any opportunity where maybe a little later there might be puffs coming from the other side of the course, well, I won't do this. I'll just, as soon as he comes up, I'll jibe away and go the other way. So I can keep my air free and maybe get something on that side of the course. You just can't give up that much distance to this guy by reaching. Make sense? How we doing? You guys all still good? All right. Yeah, so kites, or symmetrical kites, right? Or asymmetrical kites. Like on America's Cup boats or J20 or Melges 24s and Melges 20s and J70s, which you guys know I love. VX1s, they're super fast. We sailed the VX1 Nationals last year at my home lake. That was an advantage. We won that one, but it was blowing 22 on the last day downwind, and we were doing 20. So some of these sport boats go really, really fast. But anyhow, the downwind tactics on these asymmetrical chutes is far more complicated than on symmetrical chutes. We were talking about basically sailing the rum line. We just got done talking about that. Keeping your air free, maybe you jibe away a little bit, get your air free, but you're always trying to generally sail to the downwind mark when you have a mainsail, if it's a mainsail boat or a jib and main, or it's got a kite. You basically can sail at the next mark downwind, which means the tactics get pretty narrowed up downwind. Now upwind, you're using, that's why there's so many gains and lost upwind on all boats, because you're using that much race course, right? That much sail area or that much lake area. Huge expanse of boats going all over the place upwind. Huge chances to make really big gains or really big losses. Well, downwind, you're trying to go to the mark, and so be it a thistle or an interlake or an MC or whatever, for the most part, your objective is going to here. Your field really narrows up, so it's hard to get way out of bounds relative to the other boats when you're going downwind. But these asymmetrical kites, since you all know what those are, right? Instead of having a spinnaker pole like a thistle, where you put the spinnaker pole on, if you want to go dead downwind, you bring the pole all the way back to the shrouds. The spinnaker goes straight in front of the boat. And the fact that the pole holds half of the chute out to the windward side of the boat can go dead downwind with the spinnaker. Well, these new generation asymmetrical spinnakers, they don't have a pole that goes off to the side of the boat. They just have a pole that goes straight out in front of the boat. So it's just like a big Genoa or a big cruising chute. So you can't sail the boat dead downwind if you let the main out all the way, which is going to cover up the chute. So you can only sail, well, depending on how long the pole is out front, but you have to jibe back and forth. You have to jibe, a lot like this. What that means is downwind becomes much more tactical, just like upwind is on all boats, because you're spreading the fleet out all over both sides of the course again. So it's absolutely critical to make sure you're sailing downwind to where the good velocity is going to be, and especially on lakes where we have inconsistent velocity. And so that's the key factor. You can get really separated. You can get out here, and this guy gets over here, and it all kind of comes down to, did you play the shift right? Did you get to the next good velocity? And if you do it right, you make huge gains going downwind. And if you do it wrong, lots and lots of boats are going to pass you. So it's a lot more difficult. They're easier to sail because you don't have a spinnaker pole, and you're not moving the guy fore and aft. You're just trimming a sheet, just like trimming a Genoa. So they're easier to use, but they're much more difficult tactically. Any other questions aside from that? Yeah.
When I sailed an MC years ago,
Yeah.
I almost felt like that's the way you had to sail the MC downwind. You couldn't go straight downwind. You had to do a lot more reaching.
Well, in lighter air, but the track gets pretty narrow down the center of the course once the breeze starts coming in. And it's shifty enough on most of these lakes that one of the two jibes is probably
So you're not reaching
well off of
way
dead downwind. You may reach off in lighter, the angles aren't, they say that about scows, but really they're not. But, in light air, you might go reaching just to get to some velocity. It's not near you, but it's not at all like these 8 kites. It's more like a thistle than you think when there's breeze. You're still always really hoping you can get down, and not everybody's disciplined. I remember one race at the Nationals, I rounded with a group of about 5 boats, and I saw them getting a little undisciplined, and whenever I got just any puff at all, I would dig to leeward, just aiming at the leeward mark, every single little puff, and sure enough, they got reaching too much, and they never had a good puff to come down in, and I passed them all pretty easily by going low, not going high.
A break has been requested.
Oh, okay, good. Break time. We ready?
Ready when you are.
Oh, I was just staring at the trophy case. All right, we got a few more, if y'all can handle it. But we're whittling our way through it. So, telltales, right? What do I do with telltales? First MC. I should draw more. But
There's 4.
yeah. Yeah. So specific to the MC, it's a cat rig boat. It only has the mainsail. Some of the people put telltales on the MC on the sail. Maybe more like back a little, 40% of the way aft, a third of the way up, halfway up, and 2/3 of the way up. But I don't think they read that well. I think if you're to put telltales on the main of an MC, when you're kind of sheeted properly, the leeward telltale is going to be stalled the whole time, which means the sail on the back, the telltale on the back side of the main will be flapping around, and the telltale in the middle of the sail will be flowing just about right, where the streaming on the windward and leeward side, and the telltale on the top third will be the inside one will be lifted almost all the time, and the backside one will be flowing. So they don't really work that well. There's also a telltale on the top batten, and on all mains. So I don't use these telltales on the MC main. I use a telltale on the top batten, on the leech of the sail, and I probably have one of those on all mains that I race. And that just helps you figure out how to trim the main going upwind. Again, I always like to speak about moderate air conditions when it's blowing 10 or so, because that's when the sail is trimmed perfectly. And what I mean by that, in real light air, the mainsail leech on any boat will be sheeted a little less than all the way in, and in heavy air, when you get overpowered, the mainsail will be sheeted less than all the way in to help depower you. But in moderate air, when you're fully powered up, I've talked about this a little bit today. Not as big a deal on a cat rig boat to have the boom on center line, but you want the top batten parallel with the direction of the boom, exiting parallel with the direction of the boom. You know, a sloop rig boat, you probably want to have the boom on center line so you have a little better slot between the main and the jib. And that's the primary thing that you're looking at. You know, you probably want to maybe have one of your buddies on a boat behind you looking at the leech profile of your sailor. If you have a coach, you can look at the leech profile, or you can take pictures from behind the boat. But that's what you're looking for, that exit on the top batten to be exiting parallel with the center line of the boat. And not the entire batten, because the batten's soft and it's curved, but you just, if the batten's 24 inches long and it's curved, the last 12 inches will straighten out, and that's what's going to exit parallel with the center line of the boat. If you're sheeting too hard, the batten's going to be pointing towards the windward side of the boat. If you're not sheeting hard enough, the batten's going to be pointing towards the leeward side of the boat. Now, typically what happens with this telltale then is you might have been told that, hey, when that telltale stalls behind the back side of the main, you're sheeting too hard. Or you want to keep easing your main out until that telltale flows the whole time. Now, I haven't found that to be true. What's true is the first indicator. What does the leech actually look like? And then I have found on most boats, when the leech looks right, that telltale is going to be flowing aft about half the time, and it's going to be stalled behind the back side of the main about half the time. If you keep easing your main out to get it to flow the whole time, I can guarantee you're not sheeting the main hard enough in the optimum moderate air conditions, all right? So those are main telltales. Jib telltales, you know, they were...
Do you have a boom bang on that boat that you're describing there? Are you managing your twist, or are you...
I would, in moderate air, I wouldn't be using the vang to do that. I would just be doing it with the main sheet. And start using the vang when you have to ease the main out so far that it's no longer pulling down on the boom, but it's just letting the boom go out horizontally, and that's what the vang does, is keep the boom in from rising up. And so, but you don't have to worry about that in moderate air. Obviously, if the boom's on center line, the main sheet's pulling the boom down, so you don't use the vang to do that in moderate air, just main sheet tension. In fact, you'd probably be bad if you had vang on, because if you had vang on and the telltale is looking good and it's blowing 11 and everything looks right, and you get into a lull, right? Well, you're going to have less pressure on the leech, so you're going to have to ease the main sheet a little bit to help the leech open up a little bit so it has still that right configuration, less wind pressure on it the more it wants to hook to windward. So you're easing the main sheet off so it doesn't hook to windward, but if you have the vang on, well then they'll each one ease off. So don't start using the vang upwind until you're overpowered, okay? So, you know, jib telltales. That's not a jib. You know, you usually get a couple of sets, and jib telltales work good, you know. You're either going to have the inside one flowing straight aft or lifting up a little bit. You're never going to sail around with the inside or windward telltale not lifting occasionally. And you don't want the leeward telltale to be stalled or spinning around in circles. Typically, you want the leeward telltale to be streaming straight aft and the windward telltale to either be streaming straight aft or be lifting up a little bit. But for me, the most important telltales are the ones on the shrouds. Because all the other telltales I talked about, especially the ones on the jib, they tell you if you're sailing too low or sailing too high, but they don't tell you exactly how low you're sailing relative to optimum or how high you're sailing relative to optimum. So on all boats I sail, and I'm a fanatic about this, I think it makes a huge difference for me, is, well, I don't know how to, that's a boat. And that is a shroud holding up holding up the mast. I put shroud telltales on all boats I sail, and I put 2 sets on either side. I'm really strict about this. I have one about this high off the deck, and then another one about here, and they're about 1.5 feet long. And I put them on the shrouds, and I put them on with tape, and they tell me exactly what the apparent wind angle is at all times. You get any little movement, apparent wind moves fore and aft, and those shroud telltales tell you exactly what's going on. And over time, it takes a feel for how to use them. You're going to first use the telltales I was talking about earlier, the jib telltales and the main telltales, and, you know, going upwind, and you think you're in the groove, and you're looking at what the telltales say, and you're looking at boats around you, and you're pretty sure you're in the groove. Well, then you got to check in with your shroud telltales and say, what angle of attack are they showing me? How are those shroud telltales streaming aft towards me? Pretty soon you get a feel of what they should look like. And then every time you get a wind shift, first thing I check in is with the shroud telltales. I get a big lift, and whoop, my shroud telltales are pointing in towards the middle of the boat now, and I head up. I get a big header, and the telltales are starting to point straight aft, and I bear off. They're much more sensitive, the telltales on the sails. And I'm almost to the point where I get lost without putting them on. You know, at the CSCs or any MC or any boat I have some magnetic tape with me, and cassette tape, and some rigging tape. And I always make sure there's 2 sets of crisp shroud telltales. And I think if you guys get used to using them, it'll give you a little edge, because it'll show you exactly what that apparent wind is doing. Make sense? Yep.
Why do you use 2?
Just so I'm sure they're working in unison instead of in conflict. If they're in conflict, something's wrong. Sometimes you get spider webs on them, or one curls up, or somebody breaks one off. But I like to see both of them working together. And the more I do it, the more I rely on them, and I think the more benefit they are. Downwind too. They're showing you, you're kind of, it's a good angle for the skipper to be looking at. The skipper's looking through the windward side of the boat. They're looking at the water in front of them. They're looking at the shroud telltale. It's pretty much all in that line of sight. Downwind too. I mean, you really can see the apparent wind move downwind, and you can either head up going downwind or bear off going downwind based on the movement of the shroud telltale. It's really not much different than a masthead fly, right? A lot of people use masthead flies, but I don't like looking straight up in the air. I get dizzy and I don't know where I'm going. But the shroud telltale is right through my line of sight, so I don't have to lose sight of where I'm steering.
So both of them are below the boat?
Not that low. So maybe
Both of them are above?
3 to 4 feet.
yeah, like maybe the first one's a couple feet above the boom, and then the other one's high enough so that they don't wrap each other up, you know. a little bit above everybody's head if everybody's sitting down on the deck or something. But I find it to be very, very useful.
What did you say? What do you use for?
I use cassette tape. It's more lively than thread or than the yarn. Old, the old cassettes. You got any old cassettes left? You can still buy that stuff at.
Now, do you prefer classical music or?
Yeah. Like Crisscross, Sailing Away, stuff like that.
I think that's the best question so far.
All right. Yeah.
If it'll make my boat go faster, I'll use gospel.
Yeah. It will. You try to get an edge wherever you can. So yeah, new sails. Yeah, Mikelski used to sell sails for me up in Michigan, so let him answer. He says you got to buy new sails every week, so I don't know. But, I mean, the honest answer is, in the Midwest, sails don't wear out all that often. It's not that windy up here, typically. It can be windy. The season's not that long. I think when you get in a cycle of sails probably last longer than people think, especially after you get your first set. When you get your second set, the way you make your second set last for years is to use your first set when it's windy. Sails almost never wear out in light and moderate air. You could sail them for your whole life. They get a little used in light and in moderate air by putting them up, taking them down, handling them and all that. But if you roll them up and they're flying in moderate air, they'll last forever. The heavy air, the sails are flogging pre-start. They're flogging when you get overpowered. They're flogging when you attack. And they wear out pretty quick. So there's no right answer for it. Depends how often you sail. But I mean, if you're trying to win a nationals, maybe you buy a new set every couple of years. If you got money to buy them every year, maybe, doesn't hurt. If you're not trying to win the nationals, maybe every 3 years, maybe every 5 years. If you're just casual racing, Dacron sails last a long time, so they can last longer than that. But this is suicidal. What am I saying? But honestly, if you're worried about getting that new set, it's not as big a deal as you think unless you're using really old sails. So here's my suicide statement. Yeah?
One thing that I always thought that people neglected was to upgrade their spinnaker.
Yeah.
Because they would, in reality, you use the spinnaker more than half the race, and yet people would put up crap for spinnakers.
And he's right. And Mark and Bruce were the fastest in the Thistle fleet that ever came down the track. And they got new chutes fairly often. What people don't realize on spinnakers, it's pretty easy to see when your main wears out and your jib wears out. Get a lot of creases and the leeches get all gutters and weird looking angles. The chutes kind of look like chutes. They get a little thinner, they get a little fuller. That's hard to see, but it's really bad. If you're sailing a really old chute, they get really porous, so you can just blow right through them because the stiffness wears down that's in them and the breeze goes right through them. So you need to replace chutes as often as you do the other sails. This one. Yeah, this is a good example. It's sort of depowering in breeze. And the answer is there's no right answer. I love, there was I think it was a nationals, Thistle Nationals in North Cape, Lake Erie. And it was either first qualifying day. Anyhow, someone took footage of 4 boats. It was myself. They're taking footage of my boat, Ched Proctor's boat, Greg Fisher's boat, and Dave Dellenbaugh's boat. And I don't know if you know these people, but they had all won the Thistle Nationals. We had all won the Thistle Nationals, so we all knew how to sail upwind. And it was pretty windy. It's probably blowing 15 plus. And we all had basically the same results for the day, and we were basically going the same speed. But we came back and everyone's watching the footage of our 4 boats, and 2 boats were sailing exactly the same, and the other 2 boats were sailing radically different than those 2 boats, but also sailing the same. So you think about it, the end game sort of ended up being the same, which is why there's more than one good way to depower a boat. On all boats, regardless of whether you have a backstay or a vang or whatever you have, the primary thing you have to do when you get overpowered, especially initially in a puff, like I was talking about earlier, is proper mainsheet control. And when the wind increases, the apparent wind goes aft initially, right? Because the wind increases, but the boat speed hasn't increased yet. And then when the boat starts going faster, then the apparent wind moves back forward. So initially, when you get a puff, you have to ease the main for 2 reasons. 1, to keep the boat on its feet, and 2, because to reorient the sail plan with the fact that the wind just went aft initially, which you really can see on these Shroud Telltales if you use them. So you're getting overpowered, you're in a puff, and there's a lot of old articles in book. Ease, hike, trim. I don't know if you've ever read that or seen that, but it's so true. I mean, again, it goes back to the basics. You've got to ease the main sheet, ease, hike, trim. So Ched Proctor and Greg Fisher had lots and lots of vang on their main sheet, okay? They were using the vang to depower the main. Well, sort of. The vang's doing something. It's trying to push the boom forward a little bit. It's bending the mast a little bit, but it's not really opening up the leech, because when you pull on the vang, you're pulling down on the boom, so leech stays fairly tight. Well, they didn't have any problems keeping their boats going forward and staying pretty flat, because if on the footage you watched them, and when the puff hit, they were letting the main way, way out, exhausting the leech of the main, right? So even though the main wouldn't open up because the boom was keeping the vang was keeping the boom from going up, the fact that they let the boom way, way out, that helped spill the sail off the sail, right? So long way out of travel of the boom, back in. Long way out, back in. Anybody that sails lasers, right? You guys know what that's all about, right? A lot of out and in, out and in. Well, they were exiting the leech to some given point till the boat felt good. Well, then they looked at the footage of my boat and Dave Dellenbaugh's boat. And I guess we're both lazier than those other guys because we would only use a little bit of vang, moderate vang, kind of snug it up. And so since we didn't use as much vang, it wasn't pulling down on the boom as much, so when we eased the main, boom would go up a little bit. And so that meant that if we ease the main maybe only half as far, since the boom was going up in the air, top of the sail was spilling off more, and we were getting a lot of the sail to open up just as much as the guys who were traveling way, way out, because the boom was helping us by rising up, and so we were exhausting the sail a little easier. We didn't have to move the boom out as far. But basically all 4 boats were doing the same thing. Ease, hike, trim. We just didn't have to ease as far because we didn't have the vang pulling it down, pulling the leech down quite as hard. So which way's better? No, I'm not going to say. My way's lazier. I'm all for that. I didn't have to travel as far in and out. And Dellenbaugh too. He must be lazy like me. So that was a really neat kind of round table discussion after the first day of probably the qualifying series of the Nationals. It's quite obvious that there's no exact way to depower. It goes back to the basic of proper main sheet trim. So for them, it was more ease, and for us, it was less ease to get to proper main sheet trim. Yeah?
Do you adjust the travel up?
You can do that too. Same sort of thing. It's just how it's affecting the main. On the MC, there's a really, really long traveler in the middle of the boat. Since it's in the middle of the boat, it really lets the boom out a long way. Well, on the MC, I've just decided that I really like using the traveler. So in that boat, since it almost infinitely lets the boom go to leeward, I drop the traveler way, way down. Then when I get it under control, I pull it back up. Let it way, way down, pull it back up. It's doing what I described with the vang. Now, most of the tuning guides, until I got into the class, These guys had sailed a lot of lasers. Andy Burdick is probably the best scow sailor. He works with Zenda, up at Melgis Boat Works. He's won the Sea Scout Nationals about 20 times in the MC, and he sailed lasers, so he bangs real hard. And he said, no, you don't have to, in his tuning guide, you don't have to let the Traveler down at all. Well, he's putting the bang on, and he's doing what those first 2 Thistle guys are doing, right? In and out, in and out, in and out. And I went, this is a really long Traveler. How about I just drop that down? I go, well, that's a neat way to depower. Again, there's a third way, but it kind of also works. We won lots of heavy air races in the MC at the Nationals. Yeah?
You're playing the Traveler on an MC. What do you do with the main sheet? Do you lock it in place, or you try and, because sometimes that's 2 lines to hold on to plus a tiller on a windy day.
Yeah, it gets a little tricky, but you just learn to maybe put the main sheet over in the other hand briefly. It should be a pretty quick move on the Traveler, but you'll figure out how to move your hands to make it all work. I think you just transfer the main sheet hand over to your tiller hand briefly. But sound good?
Bill,
Mm-hmm.
what about downwind?
What about downwind? Now there's the worst question of the night. Sorry. What?
Downwind with the bang.
Yeah, okay. Downwind, there's no getting around using the vang. The Traveler doesn't do anything. The easing a little bit on the, what was I going to say? You're at the mercy of the vang downwind. The main sheet doesn't go up and down anymore. It's just letting the boom in and out a little bit. Traveler doesn't do anything anymore. The boom's well beyond the end of the Traveler. So the only way you can control leech tension on any boat is through the vang. And again, typically, in most boats in moderate air, when you're trying to sail the main perfectly downwind, you use enough vang so that top batten is parallel with the direction the boom is going. If you have too much vang on going downwind, the top batten is going to be pointing towards the back of the boat. If you don't have enough vang going downwind, top batten is going to be pointing towards the front of the boat. And you have to play it a lot downwind because that's the only way to control the leech of the main is through the vang downwind. You get a little puff in moderate air, top batten's going to want to open up or head towards the front of the boat. You got to put more vang on. You're sailing along and you get a lull, and the top batten, the leech closes up, top batten starts pointing towards the back of the boat. You got to pop open and ease the vang a little bit. So you have to be very much game on and adjusting the vang going downwind. So that was actually a good question. Especially when it's super, super windy. When it's super, super windy, you feel like you're going to tip over, like the boat's going to want to flip over to windward downwind, a death roll. You want to make sure you have enough vang tension on. We don't really do reaches anymore so much. But in the old days, if you had a spinnaker up or you didn't have a spinnaker up or whatever, you're just on a reach and you felt like you were going to tip over, well, you want to let the vang go, right? To spill the top of the main off. That'll prevent you from tipping over. Well, now we're mostly going downwind, dead downwind. If you're going downwind and it gets really windy and you ease the vang, it's going to make you tip over. It's going to make you tip over to windward instead of to leeward. So you want to make sure when it gets super windy, you got a good amount of vang tension on to try to keep that leech parallel with the direction of the boom, or else you'll flip over to windward going downwind. Now, if you feel like you're going to flip over to windward and you can't get to the vang, then just quickly head up because tipping over to windward is... Ugh. Make sense? So, hanks versus furlers. Honestly, although a lot of these furlers are presented as racing furlers, even if it's a racing furler, say it's carbon or whatever, it's a slower arrangement for going upwind than hanks. So you're already ahead of the game. Years and years ago, and this is how we figured it out. The J24 class, very competitive class, hundreds of boats racing, people doing some real boat-on-boat testing. And in the early years, they allowed furlers. And some of the people had them because some of the races were distance races, and they felt like, well, maybe I got to have the furler to, switch head sails for. But even then, people were dumping the furlers and going just to hanks. And the reason is, you have a lot more control over the luff tension if you just have hanks. So you can move the draft forward, you can move the draft aft. It's just a much better way to sail than a furler. Furler is a great thing to have when you're furling, and it's a cruising boat and you have to leave it up at the end of the day. But honestly, there's no such thing as a racing furling system that can outdo hanks. So I think you're already set. Yeah. 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 We any boat we get a chance to, we dump the furler. I mean, obviously J24s. We raced a Hobie 33 Nationals a few years back with 17 boats, and the boat had a furler, and we dumped the furler and we converted all the sails to hanks. So you're doing the right thing.
Same thing on a foil, or?
Foils just aren't as lively as having the luff of the jib free. Some boats you have to have them. Some boats mandated, and obviously, a lot of big boats and cruising boats you have them for furling at the end of the day, but you wouldn't go to it as a racing feature. It's kind of unsafe too. Furlers can come undone in giant storms. We have huge storms in Texas, and so a lot of times the furlers get undone, the sails get all beat up, and whereas hanks, you take the sail off, put it down below. If you got to take a sail down, say you're caught in a storm and you have a furler and you got to take the sail down, well, the sail just wants to leave the boat, right? Because there's nothing holding it. But if it's got hanks, the whole front of the sail is sort of pinned to the headstay, so it's a little bit safer way to get around too by having a hank on sail. Oh man, we're getting there. Sail shape and different, that's a big one. So we sort of talked about, we sort of have hit on this already, kind of the perfect moderate air sail shape of, the upper third of the main, upwind exiting parallel with the boom, and the middle of the jib exiting parallel with the boom, and in light air, maybe having 10 degrees of twist in the top of both the jib and the main. In heavy air, having twist in the top of both sails so as you get overpowered. I mean, there's it could be an all-night discussion too. When you bend the mast with backstay or whatever, you're taking shape out of the front of the sail, effectively moving the draft further back in the sail. So when you bend a mast with the backstay, typically you put the Cunningham on because you want to move the draft back to the middle of the sail at least. On a jib, when it gets windier, the wind wants to move the draft further back in the jib, so you tighten the jib luff a little bit, the jib halyard a little bit more to help move the draft back forward in the jib. I mean, there's an awful lot of subtleties to sail trim, but if you remember the big ones, like we opened up the conversation with about proper leech tension through main sheet on the main and proper leech tension through jib sheet on the jib, that gets you most of the way. Any sort of specific questions about sail shape that I didn't hit yet? Yeah.
What about Cunningham and MC scales?
Yeah, as it gets windier and you're either vanging or sheeting harder, you sheet harder because the leech is being blown open in breeze, right? And so you counter the leech trying to spill off too much by sheeting a little bit harder as long as you're not really overpowered. Well, that bends the mast, and then when it bends the mast, it effectively moves the draft aft in the sail because you're taking the shape out of the front of the sail, and the wind's trying to blow the draft back in the sail. So you add Cunningham as it gets windier for that reason. More and more and more. Not a ton, but just Cunningham typically goes on as it gets windier. Same with outhaul. Outhaul goes on as it gets windier. Outhaul goes on when it's blowing 0 to 3. You want real tight outhaul. Well, you sort of brought up the idea about the wind having trouble moving in real light air. Well, it also has trouble moving around a real deep foil. It starts to go around the foil and then detaches. It can't make it all the way to the back of the foil. So by twisting the sail open, you've effectively flattened the sail. And by pulling the outhaul on, you've effectively flattened the sail. So if it's blowing under 5, you kind of want a fairly flat sail. But in moderate air, you want the sail to be all powered up. So I blow open the outhaul on the MC in moderate air when I'm not overpowered. Make sense? Did I lose you? Yeah, so I open up the outhaul in moderate air on the MC or any other boat. What are the questions about sail shape? No?
What question did we not ask tonight that you would have suggested that we asked?
No, it was good. It was good. It was good. I'm trying to think. There's something I was going to bring up that I don't think there is. I think we did good. Yeah. That's it. Yeah. Oh, no, we're not. That's not it. Yeah.
Can I ask a bonus question for
Yeah.
the t-shirt?
You're setting yourself up for failure, but ask the question anyhow.
So it's on a completely different subject. Do you see the foiling boats gaining popularity around the country?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I actually like that question. And my answer is, nah, that's a bunch of crap. So there's an obsession with our sport, which I think is the wrong obsession. And the obsession is we're always looking for more speed in the sport. But that's not our sport. I mean, speed freaks are going to be racing jet skis or downhill snow skiing or NASCAR. That's not our sport. Is a moving chessboard. And they're slow vehicles. Been racing sailboats for hundreds of years. So this obsession with ever faster sailboats, and I just don't see it. There's a lot of what happens in our sport that trickles down from the America's Cup. But it only trickles down briefly. The wing keels, we see it on TV and then we try to mimic it in our sport. Well, almost nobody's going to be an America's Cup sailor. And even fewer of us are going to be Olympians. And they're kind of making a move to a little bit faster stuff too. We're all just going to race the boats that we race. And trust me, none of us are good enough to successfully race a foiling boat. I've had guys that have jumped into the Moth, because it's kind of the most popular foiling small boat. And they just get pounded unless they have 6 hours a day to perfect it so they don't come off the foil when they're tacking or coming off the starting line. And you see a little bit of it, again, because anything that happens in the America's Cup, you see a little bit of it. So they're foiling in the America's Cup. So you see boats trying to do foiling catamarans and foiling monohulls and all this, but it's just not going to happen. I mean, you hear the hype and you read about the new boats, and a lot of the new boats have foils, but if you look at our sport in total, it's not the future of our sport, I don't think. No way. We're not going to have foiling, but you going to have a foiling boat? No, and you represent sailing, not that guy on the America's Cup boat. So I don't see it. Yeah.
I've got a couple of newbie technical questions. So, first of all, hypothetically, if I wanted to capsize my boat, what's the easiest way to do that?
That's super easy. I mean, I don't know. You're just trying to figure out how to get it upright. Actually, does anybody in the room have a good, Annie, do you have a good technique for capsizing a thistle and get it up? I'm not good at getting boats up when they capsize.
So when I had the kids and I wanted to show them how to do, when the kids were little and I didn't want them to be afraid of it, the first thing I did was put the boat at the dock, no sails, tie things down so things didn't move, take everything out of it so I didn't lose anything. Just capsize it at the dock, tie it to the dock. Just pull it over the side, stick it in the dock, and the boat. And when the water comes in, the first time they go, did it with the thistle. I did it with lasers are the easiest one. You draw it in the lake, and you just capsize the boat and get it back up. The problem with the thistle is that it's a lot of bailing. I mean, it's work, and yours is a wooden boat. It's more work. So you're committed to the process once you start. But anyway, so it's capsizing is not that big a deal, but it's one of those things that you want to avoid a bit. But so if you want to do it sometime, we'll start with my boat if you want, because it's got flotation tanks, so we can just see what the boat's like. Because it's less bailing to do. Yeah.
Also, if you're gonna do this, make sure the water's warm.
May is not a good time.
Yeah.
Okay, if you're tacking upwind, you notice the other boats around you are pointing higher than you are. What are some things that you can do to try to make your boat point higher?
Yeah, well, first you want to make sure you're in the same wind they are in, and probably if they're around you, right? Because these lakes are so shifty and then so puffy that you got to be dead certain you're in the same patch of wind they are in. And then once you've established that, well, it could be a lot of things. It could be that you're not sheeting the jib, or what kind of boat do you sail normally?
K-24.
Yeah, you might not be sheeting the jib or Genoa hard enough. You might not be sheeting the main hard enough. You might be sheeting them hard enough, but you might not be lifting the inside telltale of the boat enough. Once a J24 gets moving pretty good, when you get a puff and it starts to go even faster, you can really feather the boat up into the wind a little bit and really almost break the leading edge of the Genoa for a little bit. See a little bit of dancing of the leading edge of the Genoa. So maybe you're not quite pointing high enough, especially if it's in velocity. So without being there, I can't be sure, but it's probably either that you're not sheeting tight enough or just not heading high enough. People, especially in our sport that are beginners, have the tendency to sail too low and too fast because it feels better. You can feel it on the helm. You feel the boat powered up. Helps the boat heel up a little bit. It is going faster, so that feels good. So typically, as you become a better helmsman, you end up sailing the boat higher, a little bit slower, and a fair bit flatter, which means all that helm you used to have goes away too. And for newer sailors, I think usually they're just sailing too low.
We're going to get him to tip over that J24 here this year.
All right. Sounds like you might be a reacher. Yeah. Yeah.
A lot of these boats are dry sailed, I'm thinking, but for the ones that are in the Midwest, sitting in the water a lot of the time, there's always I don't want a fuzzy bottom, I gotta pull it out. What's your favorite bottom paint or maintenance or so forth for this type of an environment?
I'm really bad at all other parts of our sports, including bottom paints. If you have a bottom paint, fine, but you probably still have to wipe it down a little bit, I would imagine. Do you have a bottom job on your boat, or?
Yeah, we got GC17, but there's some other stuff out there. That I can't find good information on.
I think you get a little growth on all of them, honestly. I think if, instead of spending money on a new bottom job, you just, a lot of people just jump in, and if you wipe down a boat with bottom job or not, you get a lot of that stuff off before the race if you have time.
I was reading stuff on WD-40 the other night. They were talking about the barnacles on boats and stuff like that. Once you clean them off, put WD-40 on. I don't know how well it works. It's just something I read.
Huh.
WD-40 apparently has some of the chemicals in there prevent stuff from sticking.
That's interesting.
Try it. It's worth a try.
Yeah.
It doesn't hurt anything.
Yeah. Pretty common stuff.
Yeah.
Well, so for the t-shirt so far, I really like Carol's question. But to start off with, I like Chris's question about how to dig in after we start the race. It was the most humble question of the night. So.
Well, actually, my first question was going to be how to beat you. I couldn't do that. So.
Thanks, everybody. Yeah.